War is hell. It reaches every hand, from the soldier in the trench to the nurse at his side, from the engineer forging weapons to the families left behind. These are their stories. This is World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches. Today's episode, The Cooing and the Quiet. There was something comforting about the constant cooing of the birds. No matter how chaotic the schoolhouse was, the noises were a calming presence for him. In the tumultuous atmosphere of war, they all clung to something to soothe them. For Kevin Eustice, it was the cooing. Somehow, he was able to concentrate on the cooing even with the constant noise of shells and rifle fire just a short mile away. While most parts of the front relied on wired communications, this part relied on an older form of communication: carrier pigeons. It was Kevin who found the schoolhouse. It had been damaged by shell debris at one point, but when they found it, the front lines had moved drastically, leaving it intact. He remembered looking at it, surveying it, the damage, the size. He also remembered configuring the inside to fit the 60 or so carrier pigeons they were to care for. He had thought about lining the walls with their small carriers. They would then have to sleep in the center of the room. But since there were 3 of them, they would most likely trip over the cots when the situation became hectic. He solved this problem by taking apart the tables that had been left in the schoolhouse and building stackable shelving for the bird carriers. He then was able to line the back wall of the room with the 3 cots. Right now, things were relatively quiet. They had not had a runner in 15 minutes. This was not common. He felt the winter wind cutting through the shabbily patched holes in the walls. He glanced in the direction of his counterparts. Both had retreated to their cots and wrapped themselves in blankets to fight off the cold. All 3 of these men were brought together by command for a reason. Each had a specialty that would assist in the running of the outpost. Theo Barande was a Frenchman, brought on to decipher dispatches for English consumption. Kieran Sullivan was an expert in horses. He also served as the group's quartermaster. Not only did he divide the rations between the 3 of them, he shoed and groomed the horse that he used to take the runners back to the front when needed. Kevin himself had the bird experience. He had come from a small village 100 miles or so north of Liverpool and worked as a telegraph assistant. He was used to working with carrier pigeons before the war. It was Theo who broke the silence. "I swear this is the first time I've been this bored since we've been here." "And it's only been a few minutes," replied Kieran. Kevin looked at them and smiled. "Saber it, guys. It won't last forever. I'm sure there are runners on the way as we speak." Kevin did not know too much about these men, only that Kieran was Irish and Theo was French. These lulls in actions were not something that happened too often, and when they did, the men never spoke of their personal lives. Kevin was just about to ask Kieran what his home life was like when he heard and felt an explosion from outside. All 3 men looked towards the front door of the schoolhouse. "That was closer than normal, right, or am I crazy?" asked Theo. "You aren't wrong," replied Kevin. "But thankfully it's still far enough away from us that we don't have to worry about it." "Yet," replied Kieran. Kevin stood and walked towards the door. The other men tossed off their blankets and followed. There was smoke rising towards the sky about a half-mile away. "That's nowhere near the front line. Did we lose ground?" asked Kieran. Kevin, who was still looking in the distance, said, "No, we would have known. Someone would have had us send a pigeon with that message." "That's true," replied Theo. None of the men knew the name of the village the schoolhouse once served. They only knew that what remained of it sat a short walk away in the opposite direction of the front. The schoolhouse stood in a clearing surrounded by woods, probably the only reason it was still standing at all. They heard a noise from the underbrush, and a man emerged. It was a runner. A runner meant a message that these men had to attach to a pigeon, or sometimes multiple pigeons, and send away. "What's going on over there?" asked Kevin. The runner bent over a moment with his hands on his knees in an effort to catch his breath. "I have a message for General Montgomery. It needs to go out as soon as possible." Theo scratched his chin. "That would be our last bird home from Montgomery. We better hope someone brings one back to us soon." Kevin looked at him and Kieran. "Doesn't matter." He then looked at the runner. It was a young kid, about 18, he figured. "I'll take it." The runner spoke quickly. "It's in French. I don't know what it says, but I think it's about the misfire that just happened." This caught Kevin's attention as he handed the message to Theo. "Misfire? You're saying that explosion we just heard was a misfire?" "Ah, yes, sir. Somehow the gun lost its elevation at the time of shooting and the shell went straight into the ground." "How'd you get here so fast? It just happened like 5 minutes ago," Kieran asked. The runner just smiled. He knows he's fast, Kevin thought to himself. Kevin looked at Kieran. "Don't worry about it, Kieran. Just get a horse and take him back to where he needs to be." "Yes, sir." And Kieran rounded the corner towards the back of the schoolhouse with the runner. Kevin went back inside. It was Theo's job to interpret the message and rewrite it in code on a small piece of parchment. The message then would be rolled up and put into a small canister that attached to the leg of the pigeon. "Well," Kevin asked, "anything we need to know?" "No, the kid was right. They're just letting Montgomery know that it was a misfire and that the enemy had not gained ground." That made sense to Kevin, for if Montgomery thought the enemy had overtaken the position, then he would have had to muster more troops and equipment to attempt to take it back. They had to hope now that no more messages would have to go to Montgomery. If there was, then Kieran would most likely have to go by horse to deliver it, and that in itself was a 10-mile journey. Once the small container was attached to the pigeon's foot, Kevin took him outside. He stood just outside the schoolhouse. He knew that Montgomery's position was to the north and west of the schoolhouse, so he stood facing that direction. He tossed his arms up, released the bird, and stood to watch the bird disappear into the cloudy December sky. The day had been hectic. Runner after runner had already been to the schoolhouse, and it was barely noon. Kieran had barely any time to feed his horse before he had to take another runner through the snow and back to the command line at the front. Kevin was releasing bird after bird into the December sky, and Theo had written so many dispatches that he felt his wrist tighten. It was quiet for a moment now, but Kevin heard something outside. "Is that a vehicle?" he asked. "Sounds like it," replied Theo, taking a break from writing the latest dispatch onto a small strip of paper. Kevin stepped outside, where he was indeed greeted by a vehicle that stopped near the door of the school. "Got some birds for you," the man said as he stepped out. "How many?" Kevin asked. "About 14. I believe 4 Montgomery, 3 from Gilliam, 2 from Miller, and the others I'm not sure off the top of my head, but they're labeled." Kevin made his way to the cargo area of the vehicle, where the birds were indeed labeled and in covered wicker baskets. He reached in to grab 2 baskets, and the man grabbed 2 as well. "Follow me," Kevin told him. He led the man into the schoolhouse, and, following the labels on the baskets, he put the birds into their rightful carrier along the wall. "That's a lot of birds. You guys been pretty busy?" the man asked. "You can say that," answered Kevin. "It's been a heck of a Christmas Eve for sure," added Theo. Kevin had forgotten what day it was and asked, "It's Christmas Eve?" It was the courier that answered. "It sure is, and instead of being home with our families, we're stuck in this hellhole." Theo laughed. "Thanks for the reminder." "All right, guys, how about the items drop off?" Kevin shook his hand. "Thank you. Be safe." "You guys too," and the man walked out. 10 minutes later, Kieran returned, and as he walked in, he said, "Did you guys know it's Christmas Eve?" The hours passed and more dispatches had been sent. The sky began to darken. This was the time of day when messages slowed drastically. Troops regularly stayed within their trench systems in the dark. Attempting to cross no man's land with no light was fraught with obstacles one would not be able to see, especially during a low moonlight evening. The 3 men were huddled under blankets as the cold December wind made the schoolhouse unreasonably cold. Oil lanterns burned nearby on a table, and a wood stove, which had been installed just a month earlier, provided a little warmth and comfort, although not much. Theo and Kieran had been discussing their Christmas Eve family traditions. Kevin listened in. "What about you, Kevin? You have family at home?" Kieran asked. "I do. I have a wife back in Arendelle and a little girl. Of course, my parents and 6 siblings, too. I come from a big family." "Where is Arendelle?" Theo asked curiously. "It's about 100 or so miles from Liverpool, just a small village. My father runs a mill there and my mother is a seamstress. I worked for the postmaster. I took care of his birds." "That makes sense," added Kieran. There was a light knock on the door. Kieran started to rise as he looked at the door. "That's weird." "Hold on, you stay here." Kevin stood and walked to his bunk where he retrieved his firearm. He then made his way to the door. When the door opened, he saw a young man with a note. A runner. This was unusual. Kevin, although surprised, snapped back into work mode. "A message? For who? Montgomery?" "It needs to go to everyone, sir," the boy replied. Confused, Kevin asked, "What do you mean, everyone?" "I don't know, sir. I was just told that this message needed to get to everyone, and now." He held out the note and ran back towards the woods, not waiting for a reply. Kevin closed the door and turned to see Theo already sitting by a lantern, the small strip of paper and a pencil in his hand. He was ready. The room was silent until Kieran spoke. "That was odd." "I agree. Looks like we need multiple copies. We have the pigeons of what? 12 people on hand?" Kevin asked. "Not sure. Keeping tabs of the birds is your department, Kevin," Theo added. "Make 13 copies just in case, Theo. I'll get the canisters ready." One by one, copies were made, rolled up, and attached to the birds, and one by one the pigeons were taken outside, faced towards the direction of their target, and tossed into the air. When all was said and done, Kevin walked back into the schoolhouse. "That was fun. Theo, what did the messages say?" Theo shook his head at him as he spoke. "That was weird, Kevin, very weird." Kevin looked at him expectantly. He still wanted to know what the message was, and he knew Theo was aware of that. "The message was even weirder than the situation," Theo finally said. "Well, what was it?" asked Kieran. "It said, 'The Germans are singing.'" The morning sun was creeping through the cracks in the walls and through the windows when another knock echoed through the schoolhouse, waking Kevin from a deep slumber. Almost robotically, he approached the door and opened it. It was another runner. "Who needs the message?" Kevin asked reflexively. "Everyone." The man shoved the paper in his hand and started back towards the woods. When he closed the door, he found that Theo and Kieran had been awoken by the knock as well. "What time is it?" Kieran asked. Removing the timepiece he kept in his pocket, Kevin glanced down. "It's 8:30. A little late for our first runner." "You're right. Usually they start to show at dawn," Theo added. Kevin watched as Kieran shrugged his shoulders and then stretched. "We got to sleep in a bit. That's a plus." He unfolded the note and tried to read it, but as the others, he could not. "Theo, you're up. It's in French." Kevin again began to get the canisters ready, but out of the corner of his eye, he noticed Theo put the pencil down and picked up the piece of paper. He said something under his breath, but Kevin could not hear what it was. "What's going on, Theo?" he asked, his curiosity getting the best of him. Theo shook his head. "You won't believe this, but this message is even weirder than the one last night." "Well, what does it say?" Kevin asked. "The fighting stopped last night. The men, I guess, are leaving the trenches." "Retreating? Is the war over?" Kevin asked, a tinge of hope in his voice. "No," Theo said. "Both sides are meeting in no man's land." It was then that Kevin noticed it. In the distance, there was no shelling, no gunfire. It was completely silent. They had tried to stop him, but the pull was too strong. Once the messages were sent, Kevin had taken the one horse they had and began a trek to the front lines. He had to know if this was true. What if another runner comes? I wouldn't know which direction to release what pigeon, Theo had asked. He had responded sharply. Just wait for me. I'm sure that the messages can wait at this point. The woods were thick, and a light fog rested atop the snow that covered the ground. He did not run the horse, he merely walked. When he emerged from the wood, he could hear singing. He was still too far away to see anything beyond the trench system, but as he grew closer, he saw men. They were wandering about outside of the trenches. In a trance, he stopped the horse and dismounted. He found himself walking towards the trenches, then he was inside the trench, and next he was also in no man's land. Men were playing football. They were in green representing the British Army, blue representing the French Army, and field gray representing the German soldiers who only yesterday were firing upon them. The teams seemed to be a mix of all three armies, and the language barrier was forgotten. He wandered some more. He saw men exchanging gifts, sharing photos of their loved ones, and singing together with their arms around each other's soldiers. He stood there just before a large crater, a shell hole, the bottom filled with snow and tepid water, a body floating within it. He looked all around him, seeing the camaraderie, the sharing, the singing. Across the crater, he saw a man in the gray German uniform doing the same. Only this man was not looking around. He was looking at him. Kevin smiled, and the man smiled back. You've been listening to World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches, where history comes alive through the lives of those who lived it. If this episode moved you, please share it, follow, and leave a rating. Help keep these stories alive. Want to hold these stories in your hand? Explore the books inspired by them, available now on Kindle and in paperback.